started. Welcome everyone, and I see some of you that have joined us from previous webinars, but welcome to the 5th year of the ICBE, the Institute for Competency-Based Education Spring Webinar Series. We thank you all so much for joining us today. If you're here today, you're here to learn from our A&M Commerce colleague and subject matter expert, George Swindell, in relation to CBE course design. George is also going to demo his math what is it, George? 1332 course for us as well. And really, I don't mean to brag on George, but he has spoken about CBE course design and curriculum mapping at multiple conferences, and he's also willing to share and has shared his time and expertise with other institutions that reached out to ICBE to learn more about course design. So George, thank you for being here with us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise with all of our attendees. Some housekeeping. Everyone, if you do have any questions along the way of George's presentation, please use the question box. I will be reviewing the question box. You are able to ask questions during and after the presentations. We're going to try to keep this organic, so please put your questions in there. Okay, George, without further ado, I'm gonna pass the ball to you so you can introduce yourself and we can get this presentation going. Welcome, George.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, maybe. I don't know time zones of everyone that's present. Just to clarify a little thing, I do not see myself as a subject matter expert in curriculum design or course design. However, I do feel like throughout the years, I've picked up some tips and tricks through a multitude of different mentors and other colleagues. So I'm hopeful that you can all gain something from this and take it with you. And as Carlos had mentioned, please feel free to put your questions in the question panel, and I will be more than happy to help in any way, shape, or form, provide any clarification that I can. So as Carlos had mentioned, I am an instructor for our competency-based education program. I teach specifically in the core curriculum. Currently, I am teaching math and psychology courses. And so today I'm going to kind of talk about the course design process that we went through, and then dive into the actual Math 1332 course that we are currently utilizing. So to start off, when it comes to the design process and the developmental process for CBE courses, it's going to be very similar to what you would have in a traditional setting. The difference might come down to the way you structure the development process. And what I mean by that is you're probably going to start with more of a bottom-up approach. Typically in a traditional class, when you start developing a course, you may start with what text am I going to utilize that encompasses, our learning objectives. Whereas in a CBE course development process, you're probably going to start with what are the learning objectives and then build the content and material around those. So it is kind of like a bottom-up approach. When it comes to the actual developmental process, though, it is very cyclical in the sense that you should always be looking for that continual improvement process. So we're always going to be starting back with our coordinating agencies, any stakeholders that we may be inviting to these conversations, whether it be university, departmental level advisory boards, or even external advisory boards to help with those application components. From there, you'll look at your course learning objectives, start developing your topics that enhance those little milestones that are built within those topics, what assessments are going to use, and then from there, the content that you will provide to the students in order to achieve that mastery. And then again, we'll start the entire process over, however frequently that you feel is appropriate for your program. So the proposed steps that I kind of have that we'll kind of discuss in brief, we'll start with the actual learning objectives and learning outcomes on the course level. I'm not going to talk much about the program level outcomes. I'll kind of leave that up to y'all, only because your program level outcomes are going to be very specific. But the same kind of process can be used for each of these. For the core curriculum, we are using the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board's ACGM I'm sure that's also available in multiple different other areas. The ACGM is the Academic Course Guide Manual, is what the acronym stands for. And this basically outlines the course outcomes that your accrediting agency kind of expects. And all different institutions have the opportunity to kind of submit to that. And so that's kind of how we organically started with this course development process. From there, you could talk with the different university layers. So does your university have general education outcomes that are applicable to those courses? Does your external committee have additional components that they feel is beneficial to include in these lower developmental courses? And then any other potential stakeholders that you might have, such as the departments themselves. I know for us, the College of Innovation and Design, we kind of house our core curriculum, but we also work directly with those different departments to ensure consistency and uniformity within those different courses. From there, once you have those overall course outcomes, you'll start developing your competency statements. So these are going to be, your Bloom's taxonomy, measurable, actionable statements, ensuring that those align with those learning outcomes. Once you have those competency statements, then we start looking for, what milestones, what individual topics are going to enhance that and allow us to assess those competency statements. From there, we'll move on to how are we going to assess that? Are we going to use projects? Are we going to use direct assessment? Is there indirect assessments that we're going to utilize to assess mastery level? Once we have those assessments, then it's the painstaking process of identifying the actual materials that we are going to be utilizing to help students achieve that mastery level. So those materials could be anything from a textbook to online resources to videos, a whole slew of different things. In our courses, we are focusing on open educational resources to try and prevent additional textbook costs for our students. So that's an initiative that we're currently working on, and I think a lot of other institutions are working towards that as well. So what does this kind of look like? Well, again, the ACGM, when you start this process, I've included the link to this particular manual. You can search the different discipline areas within it, and eventually you would come across your specific course if it's a part of those lower level division courses. If you're looking more at applied major courses or upper division, they probably will not be in here, but there are some upper level courses that are present. So it's definitely something to start with. So for the Math 1332 Contemporary Math course, we chose this course because it is a non-STEM design course. And so we felt like it is the most appropriate math course for all of these various majors that do not fall underneath your STEM. So from the ACGM, we have the different learning outcomes for this particular course, and you see those listed on the right-hand side, 1 through 6. So apply the language and notation of sets, solve problems in mathematics of finance, demonstrate the ability to choose and analyze mathematical models, such and such and such and such. So from here, we then began this process of meeting with those different stakeholders to develop what topics are going to be discussed in this course. And we kind of mapped each of the ACGM and university and department outcomes, course outcomes, to these different topic levels and competency modules that we developed. So just for example, competency 1 is talking about logic. So this one, if I follow this line, maps to the ACGM, determine the validity of an argument or statement and provide mathematical evidence. It also corresponds to the demonstrating the ability to choose and analyze mathematical models, blah. As well as it touches on our university and departmental level critical thinking and communication skills. So Through this process, we devised different modules that would kind of segment all of these learning outcomes and course outcomes into more manageable pieces of pie, if you will. From there, we identified the different topics that we would utilize for each of these. So starting off with the logic, we broke that down to the milestone of problem solving and strategies that go into that. We specifically use George Polya's 7 strategies of problem solving. From there, we went into the inductive and deductive reasoning components, and then just general logic terminology. So once we've started and gathered all of these little milestones and learning objectives, we then started the process of mapping all of this into one cohesive map for this course. I provided with you a handout that you could feel free to take with you and use. The one thing that I will mention is that this again is more for course curriculum mapping and not necessarily program curriculum mapping. So we'll take a look at that handout that is available underneath the handout tab. I have provided a column here for the program level outcomes because there are some program level outcomes that might be introduced in some of these lower division courses. And so that might be a column that y'all could utilize in your specific program and situations. But from there, we have our course competencies, competency statements, again, specific, actionable, measurable, and then what learning outcomes support that particular competency statement, what learning objectives or benchmarks are needed to achieve that specific learning outcome, how are we going to assess those benchmarks, and then lastly, what resources are we going to utilize in order to provide that ability to reach mastery level for those different assessments. So an example of this in action I have here. This is for the Math 1332 course, specifically underneath our Module 5. I know it says Module 4 there, but bear with me. It's been edited since this was originally developed. But in the statistics module, our competency statement is to utilize basic descriptive statistics to collect, analyze, and interpret data and make informed decisions. And so from there, we have our outcome that we are going to assess. This is not the only one for this particular module, but I just wanted to give you an example of what this could look like. So given a data set of particular type, whether it's numerical or categorical, display and summarize the data using appropriate graphical display numerical summaries. So this would be like if I give you a data set and then you are going to then decide, should I use a pie chart or a histogram for this? And then from there, how those different enabling objectives along the way, they'll need to be able to calculate your descriptive statistics. So your mean, median, and mode. And so all of those are listed there. And then what assessment types are we going to use in order to assess those objectives? So we've got some problem solving assessment types. We've got some scenario-based situations. And then what materials. We can go in as detailed as we want with this, but typically what we'll see is some form of readings, some videos, some presentations, and then I always try and include some sort of indirect assessment to allow students to practice and see if they've achieved that mastery rating before they go to a post-assessment. So all of this together, what does it look like in practice? So in a course design, you're looking for a few things, specifically your competency statements. You know, those actionable, specific, measurable statements that align to the course outcomes. From there, I always want a pretest to make sure that I am diagnosing where my students are, where they have strengths and where they have weaknesses. And this is going to help me kind of individualize their educational journey to better suit their, specific abilities at the time. From there, I'll direct them to the materials that pertain to their weaknesses, and we'll work on developing those to that mastery level or above. And then they'll have their post-test to demonstrate their mastery. We allow 3 attempts to achieve mastery on our post-tests. And we have set the mastery level at 80%. So a student must achieve an 80% or higher on one of those 3 post-test attempts. in order to demonstrate mastery. And then the last thing that we like to include are some project or artifact that students can kind of synthesize all of this information and produce a product that they can take with them and say, based off of this information that I've gathered or that I showed competency on, I produced this product that can benefit me in some area that's specific to their situation, to their major, to their work experience, whatever that case might be. So let's jump into an example of what this looks like. So
George,
yes.
As you look for that example, I have a great question from Dr. Wegman. Well, first she says she loves the curriculum mapping handout, so props to you. Do you have any advice for faculty who are transitioning from a traditional online course to a CBE course?
That is an excellent question. So I think the big thing, and we may touch on this a little bit towards the end when we talk about some tips and tricks for CBE specifically, but when it comes to transitioning an traditional online course to a CBE modality, I think the biggest thing is to assess if we are still working in an asynchronous aspect or if we're trying to achieve a synchronous course. Because a lot of the times I see this in online education is there's a lot of reliance on discussions. And in an asynchronous environment, especially one where a student can show mastery and competency within a day, it's hard to have those asynchronous discussions if a student is trying to accelerate, through their program. I think one of the biggest tips and tricks would be to ensure that all of the materials that are being required are necessary for demonstrating mastery of the competency. So, for example, what would be a good example of this? Besides the asynchronous discussions, another one might be activities that are present in the course, whether they be quizzes or worksheets or things like that. Maybe not have them a part of the grade, but maybe have them there for students who need that additional work because it's a weakness of theirs. It's doable, obviously, but I think the key thing is going to be working on what is needed in order to show mastery and getting rid of the excess superlative things that might not necessarily be there, that might end up just being what some would consider busy work for an online course. I know there are several courses that I kind of have that. Especially through like my educational journey up to this point. Does that kind of address that, Dr. Wegman?
Well, Dr. Wegman gets back to us from Amy. So you mentioned that it's 80% or better, right? And there's an artifact. So Amy asks, what do you think about offering the project as an option for demonstrating mastery, i.e. students could choose post-test or a project? What are your thoughts on that, George?
So that's going to come down to your program design and then whatever approvals that you'll need for that. When we first developed this course or this program, that's what we chose as demonstrating competency. They would demonstrate competency through a direct assessment, as well as demonstrating competency through a project or artifact that aligns with that course. So I'm sure that there are a multitude of different programs out there that offer different requirements. Some may only have project-based learning. Some may only have direct assessment learning or requirements. So I think that's just going to come down to program preference and potentially even the type of program that you're working with. So for example, a technical program where the there may not be as many kind of theoretical components to it, and it might be more hands-on. In those instances, having a post-test might not be the most beneficial to assessing mastery. Whereas, just for an example, welding, I'm sure that there are several components with a certification that a post-assessment would be the appropriate measure, but having a hands-on lab for assessing their actual ability to do these, safety criterion, do these specific welding techniques, I think is an appropriate measure. So that I think that's just going to come down to program specific needs.
Awesome. Thank you, George. And Dr. Raymond says yes and thanks. Just so everyone knows, I've had a couple questions. If the session is being recorded, yes, it will be recorded, and you'll get the recording. And then, George, I'm assuming you are able to share this presentation as well with folks that maybe want the presentation as well?
Yes, I can share the presentation. I'm probably not going to be able to share this course only because it's specific to D2L Brightspace. So if you do not have D2L Brightspace, unfortunately, I can't get this to you. But I'm happy to share with any and all resources that that I have.
Awesome. Okay, that's the two questions we have, George. So please continue.
Excellent. So here is what used to be Math 179. It is now Math 1332. I do not have the ability to change this title. So that's why it still says 179 there. But let me enlarge this just a little bit. So I always start my course with a welcome letter, welcome announcement. I also send this information to them via email, usually in a more condensed version, just so then that way I can make sure that they're actually reading everything, because students read everything that instructors provide to them. So our courses are set up in modules. Some courses are single module. Some courses, specifically in the core curriculum, there are multiple modules. So each module comes with a pre-test and a post-test. And then we also have learning objectives built into those. So you might see that this one is hidden. This is because we're currently going through some redevelopment and restructuring in some of our courses, and this is one that is being taken out. So our students start with our pre-test. Based off of their pre-test, they will I will provide them with feedback on areas for improvement, areas of weakness. So then that way we can look at which learning objectives do they need to start with and which ones can they skip over. So we'll just jump in here and look at this real fast. So based off of these questions, some programs like to explicitly say this is from learning objective 1, this is from learning objective 2. That is definitely a tactic for transparency that a lot of programs appreciate. I personally don't do that, only because I want to be that one that gives them that individualized feedback. So here we have some problem solving, inductive, deductive reasoning, problem solving some more, and then syllogisms with deductive and inductive reasoning. So all of these different components, they would take the pretest. I would then say, congratulations, I've got your pretest graded. It looks like we are good on learning objective 1. We might want to review over the, I'm trying to exit this and it's not working well for me and I'm not sure why. We might want to review over the problem-solving technique of XYZ, but otherwise you're good. From there, we should move on to learning objective 2 and really focus on syllogisms and deductive inductive reasoning. So then here, they've got some readings that they could do that are linked out. I've got some presentations for them, some that are videos, some that are just PowerPoint presentations, whether that be with audio or just problems that they could practice with solutions. And then I also have some exercise problems that I provide to them. Typically with these exercise problems, I like to be very much more hands-on. So a lot of these are going to be like worksheets that they could provide, like they could fill out and then shoot to me, and I typically will get them graded within a few hours. I also have a couple of quizzes in here, but for the most part, I like to, really hands-on focus on the individualized component to make sure that they're getting the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need, and kind of not spending excess time on ones that they've already mastered. So once they've gone through that module, then they have their post-test. I have 3 different post-tests. Some people have 1 post-test with a pool of questions. And then I also have release conditions on these. I have passwords on my post-test, so that way I don't get into a situation where a student comes in and exhausts all 3 attempts in just a few hours without giving me an opportunity to provide them with feedback. So they'll take that post-test, and then again from there, we'll start that process over. Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? If you met that 80% threshold, then congratulations, you have shown mastery of this competency. Let's move on to a different one. So that's kind of what a typical course in our program will look like. There are some like minor variances. Some courses are more specific to the program. Unfortunately, this course is across multiple programs. So I try and provide examples that are kind of more of a day-to-day example rather than specific to their area of expertise that they may be exhibiting. So that's that. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, the last thing I wanted to do was talk about some tips and tricks. So when it comes to CBE, a lot of the times I like to use the word that I'm a guide on the side. I'm definitely not a sage on the stage. I am not lecturing to my students unless we are provided, or unless we're scheduling a one-on-one tutoring session outside of your normal class time. So I'm more of a facilitator on where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses, and then giving them the tools that they need to gain that mastery. Another one, be responsive, as well as be proactive, not reactive. I know a lot of these, are like, well, that's obvious, but it sometimes can be lost. Be engaging. Anytime that you can provide an example that is more applicable to a specific student's background, the easier it is for them to grasp this information, especially in some of these core areas where they may not want to be in. I know a multitude of people, probably some people here today, would never in a million years want to go back to math. So being able to be engaged with the students and where they're coming from is going to help their educational journey immensely. And then this is one that I've kind of started including as a tip and trick, just because it always comes up. I'm sure everyone in here, has, especially, faculty, have dealt with the dreaded email from the student who is asking a question that is clearly outlined in the syllabus. But I would implore us all to not get upset when students do things that we actually expect them to do. I don't know how many times I've had conversations with other faculty and advisors, and we all expect students not to read things. So I know we use the syllabus as a contract, but if they skip over something or if they don't read it, and if they're asking a question, I implore you not to be upset with them. They are students, their job is to be a student. And I personally have the, outlook that a student's job is to ask questions and to get answers or tools on how to get their answers. So I usually always try and respond with students' questions with, here is where you could find that information to assist you further. Here is that information at hand. And then I typically will always get an email back, oh, I'm so sorry, I must have missed that. To which I typically will always reply with something along the lines of, don't apologize for asking questions, because again, I want them to be comfortable with asking questions. There are a lot of times where students don't feel comfortable asking their instructor questions. I don't understand why, but that's why I try and encourage that environment of, I am here to answer your questions. This is a part of my job as a faculty member, as an instructor. And so your job as a student is to ask questions and get answers. So along that line, meet students with where they are. I don't know how many times I go into a course and I have, 5 to 10% of the students who are displaying mastery on every module within a week. But then I have some students who struggle through module 1 for multiple weeks. And so it's my job as an instructor to kind of meet them where they are. And this is one of the aspects of asynchronous learning that I think everyone should kind of go into it understanding it's going to be something that we're going to have to do. So with that, be flexible. Be willing to meet students where they are. If we have a student who works full-time, has family, and the only time that they can work on their coursework is late at night or on weekends, I think it's my responsibility to meet that student when they're available to meet. If they need additional, assistance, or if they're submitting things on the weekend, then that 48-hour turnaround period that is in our university handbook as a requirement is not going to be feasible for that student to be able to process and get through this course quickly. So in that instance, that's why I always try and, at max, have a 24-hour turnaround with grading and responding to emails. I typically will try and keep it under, 4 to 6 hours, but I do sleep at night, so sometimes there's 8 to 10 hours. Another one that's really beneficial is use your LMS system to your advantage. Learn it, share your knowledge with everyone, but also be consistent with how you're utilizing it across your program. Anytime that there is consistency, there's uniformity, there's transparency, students are going to be more successful because they're going to start understanding, how do I work with, Math 1332? Okay, now that I'm in Physics 2301, I know what to expect. I know where things are. I know how to access XYZ. Another one that probably could have been stated at the very beginning of all of this is there is no one size fits all. I think this is the statement that's in almost every single one of my presentations. And it's true. There is no one size fits all. How we present our courses might not work for your specific program, or you might, the program and course handout, the curriculum mapping for the courses may not work for you and your stakeholders. That's okay. It's not going to work for everybody. But I think that through all of this, we can get some tools that we can adapt to make our own. Another one is understand that this process takes time and you will make mistakes, and that is okay. The goal is continuous improvement. Rome wasn't built in a day, isn't that the saying? So with that, this process for a well-developed curriculum map course design does take time. It's not going to be done in a weekend. It might not even be done in a semester. And this is a part of that continuous improvement is, let's work on it in the summer, or let's work on it in the fall, and then let's continuously work on making improvements. When you have a good curriculum map and good assessment tools, it is easier to identify the areas that need to be improved on. And this is why having a well-developed program and curriculum map allows for easier assessment and easier reporting when it comes to, are you doing what you say you're doing? Is there validity in your statements? Is there reliability in your assessments? And then lastly, understand that the faculty role is changing. It's not being, your traditional faculty are always going to be around unless something very drastic happens. But the faculty role in CBE is changing. Like I said, I'm more of a guide on the side. I'm not, standing up on stage, lecturing to, 30, 40 students at a time. Instead, I am trying to, individualize their education to meet them where they are, as I had said. But also having this well-rounded kind of approach to education where you're not just a subject matter expert, you're also an advisor, you're a mentor, a role model. All of these aspects to the faculty role, I think, are even more prominent in a CBE modality. And then lastly, providing that individualized education. It is time consuming, and it doesn't just run itself. And that's where I see a lot of online courses, specifically with some older educators, and I'm speaking from my personal experience in grad school. They looked at their online classes as it's just going to run itself. All I have to do is grade their final project. Everything else is done automatically. And that's not the case. And I'm sure there will be some rebuttal to this saying, well, that's not the case in proper online education. This is true. But there is that paradigm shift that has to happen. So that is what I have for y'all. I was asked to give y'all also some information on April 22nd, the CBE and Regional Accreditation Good Things to Know presentation. There's a QR code for there. We also have all of our usernames, not usernames, but tags for the ICBE are present, as well as contact information for Carlos, Courtney, and myself. Thank you all so much. I will now leave it up for any questions that y'all might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, George. That was an amazing presentation. I just want to the April 22nd presentation, we have Lori Dodge, who's the Vice Chancellor of Institutional Assessment and Planning and Vice Provost at A&M University with us. And I don't know if you've seen her presentation, but it's really, really good, all about accreditation. So I'm hoping everyone can join us. Okay, back to you, George. I'm already seeing some questions come in. So from D, could you please explain the difference between post-test and project/artifacts? Are they graded towards the mastery of competency? Great question.
That is a great question. So I will look at my course as an example. So the post-test is more of a direct assessment. I provide them with questions, and then they answer them. I grade them and provide them with feedback. Whereas the project, specifically in this course, I chose a buying a house project. So they're actually going to be utilizing their skills and abilities from the finance module to kind of check off, if you will, the different competencies that we are assessing with this. So their ability to identify appropriate formula usage, calculations are assessed, and then their interpretation components to it are assessed. So typically a project or artifact is going to be something that's more tangible, that is a product that a student is creating. So I hate to go back to this example, but I think it's a good one. With like a welding situation, a project would be more like a hands-on, actually performing the safety protocols and procedures and performing the welding that is required to show mastery of those statements. Whereas a post-test would be more of a, we're utilizing it with a direct assessment approach. So what are the different, theoretical processes that would go into this? So that's kind of your differences with your post-test versus project.
Perfect. From Matthew, and with this one, maybe you can share a little bit more about our model, George. He's asking, how long is your CBE up for students to finish?
So the way that we have structured our program is 7-week terms, and we allow acceleration. So in essence, a student enrolls in 2 courses to start each 7-week at maximum. Then they have the opportunity to accelerate through those courses. So if a student comes into my class week 1, they pass every module, they blow everything out of the water, and they're done by the first Friday. Then I send them an email saying, congratulations, you have completed all the requirements of this course, you are done. They then have the opportunity to accelerate into an additional course. So we do not have hard deadlines in our program, but that's just our program. There are some programs that do have hard deadlines. So we require all of the course requirements to be done prior to 11:59 on the Friday of the 7th week. So they have 7 weeks to complete these courses.
Right, and then it's a subscription model, so the student will pay $750 each 7-week term. It doesn't matter if they take one or multiple courses, it's the same flat rate. So thank you, George. From Amy, do you ever use pretest questions as evidence of competency, meaning that if they can demonstrate a skill on the pretest, then they are done and don't even need a post-test?
So this goes into a deeper conversation when we start talking about the concern on like CLEP testing. So we do still require post-test assessments. The pretest is purely used as a diagnostic tool to assess strengths and weaknesses. It is not used as a competency assessment procedure. So they are, even no matter what they make on the pretest, they are still required to take that post-assessment. So if a student makes an 80% or higher on that pretest, I will typically say, hey, congratulations, you did extremely well. We still have these areas of weaknesses that we could improve on, but here is the information for the first attempt at the post-test. But we do still require that post-test attempt.
Okay, from Amy, a follow-up question. How do you encourage students to get started and not save their work? Sorry, I didn't finish the question. How do you encourage students to get started and not save their work until the last few weeks? There we go.
So this is a challenge. I mean, this is going to be a challenge in every modality that you utilize, unless you're using, hard deadlines. But even then, with those hard deadlines, you're going to have students who wait till the end. So what I typically will do is I will send out weekly announcements, checking in with students, in like the grand scheme. But then I also will follow up with each student individually, sending them an email saying, hey, here's where we are. Here's how long we have until we're done. Here is a temporary guide to how we could make that achievable given the time frame that's left. So we're currently in the end of the 4th week. So I'm actually about to get ready to send those emails out. I typically wait till the later part of the week, but try and do it before Friday. So then that way my students have the weekend to kind of gestate on that information and potentially, do anything that they've been putting off throughout the week because of other priorities. So that's one thing that I utilize. I also utilize the advisors that we have for our programs because I only see what's in my class. I don't see what else is going on in that student's, courses outside of my class. So I rely on them. We're utilizing a system called EAB that we can, input information that's pertinent to my course, and then the advisors and I technically have access to look at how that student's doing in their other course if that information is there. So I definitely rely on that the relationship between the advisor and the students as well to kind of help encourage students to stay active and not procrastinate. I think the other thing that I kind of rely on is also asking questions. every once in a blue moon, something will come up that's, pertinent, in like current events. So I'll try and include some of that with like the psychology course, or in like the stats class, or I'll try and find some way of connecting it to the different concepts that are covered in this math course. And then I might post it as like a general discussion that they could, go and answer, or if it's something that I know is related to, their major, I might ask their, input in one of my weekly emails. Just anything that gets their attention and gets their response can really be powerful when it comes to that engagement factor to it.
Awesome. Thank you, George. We're getting some good questions coming in. So next one, in the 7-week period, what is the last day for a student to add another course?
So for our particular program, we turn off acceleration the Friday of the 5th week. And the reason we do that is so we don't want for a student to make the mistake of getting into a course that they might not potentially be able to complete successfully. So we do have a cutoff date for that acceleration process. But right now it is the Friday of the 5th week. So that gives them 2 weeks that they could complete any additional course that they add up to that point. But the key thing to that, though, is that is if they've already been registered. So we do not have open registration. We do have open acceleration. So that's a key difference, that a lot of other programs have a rolling registration process, but we do not. We only allow registration for terms, 2 in the spring, 2 in the summer, 2 in the fall, every 7 weeks.
Okay. From Gabriel, how does the course average get calculated?
Interesting question. Good question. So the way we are doing it is the average of the successful completions for the modules and project. So for example, student comes in, module 1 makes an 80, module 2 makes an 80, 3, 4, 5, 80, and then makes 100 on the project. All of those are going to be averaged together. The key thing that we do require is each of these modules and the project must be completed with an 80% or higher. If any one of them is not completed at the 80% threshold, unfortunately, that student has not shown mastery of all components of the course, and they would receive an F. So we do have an ABF grading scale. So that's kind of a different beast that some programs might not have.
Awesome. Thank you, George. So that's the last question. I did want to ask, can you talk a little bit more about A&M Commerce transition into open education resources? I know some of the folks here are on those next steps with OER. So how did that look like for Commerce, and maybe particularly talk a little bit particularly for you and your courses?
So the transition process to OER, I would equate it to what you would see in a traditional setting of adopting a new textbook. And I mean a new textbook, not just a new edition, but adopting a new textbook. I think the key thing with adopting OER, when it comes to adopting OER, the key thing is using the resources that you have at hand. So we have an amazing team of librarians and head research assistants within our library services that we rely on. And so they were very critical in that initial process of identifying OERs, helping us understand what is an OER versus what is just an online resource. And so I think the first thing would be starting with the resources that you have at hand, and then understanding the benefits of OER. So when it comes to the benefits of OER, it financially is a better option for students. because they're no longer having to purchase or rent textbooks almost at the same price that they would have to purchase them, that they're only going to use for, a semester or 7 weeks even. And so it was just kind of a natural fit for us in our program, because we were, advertising, $750 flat rate, well, except for, XYZ. So it just became a natural progression that we were going to move everything to OER. And so how we did that was identifying those topics, those, course learning objectives, how are we going to do those assessments, and then identifying what knowledge, skills, and abilities would they need to obtain in order to show mastery. And then it's a matter of searching the multitude of OER for those specific content areas. There's a lot of different resources out there. My personal favorite is the MOM database, the Meta, I can't remember the acronym, but it's from, I believe, Missouri or Michigan. I think it's Michigan. But it's a database that you can go into, type in a content area that you're looking for, and it just spews out all of the possible OER resources that they have collected through OpenStax, through all of these different areas in one little location. So that's kind of where I started. And then from there, I started seeing different areas and different textbooks that I felt had components of what was beneficial. So I actually have 2 or 3 different books that I utilize in my math course that are OER, only because some have that logic reasoning component that's really good, and the other one might be lacking in that area, but their presentation of probability is excellent. And aligns perfectly with these other resources and videos that I have from my own catalog or from whatever other catalogs that are out there. So it's a process. Use the resources that you have at hand, and don't feel like you're doing it wrong if you're reaching out for help because you don't know, because I'm sure all of us don't know what we don't know.
Awesome, thank you, George. That so we have a couple more questions, and we have a little bit of time, so we're gonna try to get through these. From Barbara, $750 flat rate. So how many classes in what length of time? So it's the 7-week terms, but how many classes can students take, or what's the average?
So ironically, the average is like 2.337 courses. But that's the average, and this is, there's a lot of other, extraneous factors, compounding variables that go into why that average is there, because we do have some students who only register for 1 course at a time. We have some students who only register for 2 courses and are, they take their time, they want to complete 1 course in 3.5 weeks and then focus on the other course for 3.5 weeks. But then we have some students who are dead set on accelerating and getting done with this as fast as they can. And so we have had historically 2 kind of outliers. One student who had achieved 14 courses in 7 weeks. Caveat to that is this was when we allowed acceleration through the 6th week. So he did technically have 1 extra week to add some extra classes in there than what our current students do. We've had another one recently complete 12 courses. The key kind of depends on the students and where they are within their major. I do know the core curriculum courses naturally don't, you don't see as much acceleration through those as you do in some of the applied major courses or some of our elective coursework, because those are more aligned with the area of expertise of our students and of our, population that we're, trying to tap into. But the average completion is like 2 1/3 course.
And that's usually, George, right, what they sign up for, 2 courses per term usually to begin with. Okay, final question. Is there a limit to the maximum number of classes that students can accelerate through?
The only limit is the student's time. So again, we do that soft deadline of the Friday of the 5th week to prevent students from getting into something that they might not be successful in. But beyond that, the only limit is the time. I will say in some instances, the actual adding of courses might not always occur on weekends. Our advising team tries to do an excellent job of still answering those acceleration emails even on the weekends. So we try not to hamper on our end students' acceleration processes. So there is technically not a limit to how many courses that they could complete. The only limit is going to be how much time will they need to spend in that particular course, and then how many courses that they need to complete, and then how much time do they have to work on their coursework. Yeah.
Okay, that was the final question, George. I just want to thank you again so much for your time. Also, thank you to our audience for being so engaging and for being here. Don't forget, Laurie Dodge is coming up at the end of the month. You don't want to miss that. And this presentation will be recorded, so you will be